The restaurant was supposed to be romantic. Soft piano music drifted through the air, and candles flickered on every table. It was their 10th anniversary, and Naomi had made the reservation 3 months ago at this expensive Italian place downtown. She wore the emerald dress Brandon once said made her eyes sparkle. Her natural curls were styled perfectly, and her makeup was flawless. She looked beautiful and she knew it. But when Naomi walked through the entrance at exactly 7 o'clock, she saw something that would burn into her memory forever. Her husband Brandon was sitting at their reserved table by the window. He wasn't alone. A woman with long blonde hair sat across from him, and as Naomi watched from the doorway, Brandon leaned over the table and kissed her. Not a quick peck. A real kiss. The kind of kiss that said they'd done this 1,000 times before. Most wives would have screamed. Most wives would have thrown something or broken down crying right there in front of everyone. Most wives would have caused a scene that the other diners would gossip about for weeks. But Naomi wasn't most wives. Not anymore. She took a deep breath and walked straight to the table. Her heels clicked against the marble floor with each confident step. Brandon pulled away from the blonde woman when he sensed someone approaching. His face went completely white when he saw his wife standing there. "Naomi," he stammered, standing up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the floor. "I can explain. This isn't what it looks like." The blonde woman just stared at Naomi with wide eyes. She had the decency to look uncomfortable at least. That was something. "Hello, Brandon," Naomi said calmly. Her voice didn't shake. Her hands didn't tremble. She'd practiced this moment in her bathroom mirror for the past 3 weeks. "Happy anniversary." "Baby, please let me explain." Brandon reached for her arm, but Naomi stepped back smoothly. You were just kissing someone who isn't your wife on our anniversary," Naomi finished for him. She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a manila envelope. It was thick with papers. "I made this dinner reservation specifically for tonight because I wanted to give you something special." Brandon's face showed confusion and then hope. Stupid, foolish hope. He actually thought she might forgive him right there. He thought tears would come, that she'd fall apart, and then he could comfort her and beg for forgiveness and somehow make this all go away like he'd made other problems disappear during their marriage. But Naomi just smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who'd already cried all their tears in private, someone who'd already grieved their marriage in the middle of the night when no one was watching. "These are divorce papers," she said, placing the envelope on the table between the wine glasses and breadsticks. "They're already filed with the court. You've been officially served. I suggest you get yourself a lawyer." The blonde woman gasped. Brandon's mouth fell open. Several nearby diners had stopped eating to watch the scene unfold. "You're serious?" Brandon finally choked out. "Naomi, come on. We can work through this. We can go to counseling. I made a mistake, but we have 10 years together. You can't just throw that away." "I'm not the one who threw it away," Naomi replied. She looked directly at the blonde woman for the first time. "You must be Veronica. Brandon talks about you in his sleep sometimes. He also left his phone unlocked about 3 months ago, and I saw every single text message between you two. Every picture. Every plan you made. Every lie he told me so he could be with you." Veronica's face turned bright red. She grabbed her purse like she was thinking about running. "I hired a private investigator," Naomi continued, her voice steady and clear. "I have photos of you two at hotels, restaurants, and even at the apartment he rented for you on 5th Street. The one he told me was a storage unit for his business equipment. I have bank statements showing he spent over $30,000 of our joint savings on you over the past year. I have everything." Brandon sank back into his chair. The color had drained from his face completely now. He looked like he might be sick. "You knew for 3 months?" he whispered. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because I needed time to protect myself," Naomi said simply. "I needed time to move my inheritance into a separate account that you can't touch. I needed time to document everything for the divorce. I needed time to find an apartment and move half my things there while you were at your Wednesday meetings that you said were mandatory but were actually just you spending time with her." She gestured at Veronica, who was now staring down at her lap. "I also needed time to stop loving you," Naomi added. Her voice was softer now but no less strong. "And guess what, Brandon? It didn't take as long as I thought it would. Turns out, you're pretty easy to stop loving once you realize who you really are." She turned to leave, but Brandon jumped up and grabbed her wrist. Several diners tensed, ready to intervene if needed. "Naomi, please," his voice cracked. "Don't do this. I love you. She means nothing." Naomi looked down at his hand on her wrist, then back up at his face. "Let go of me, Brandon. You don't love me. You love having me. You love having someone to come home to after you're done playing around. You love having a wife who cooks your dinner and does your laundry and makes you look good at company events. But you don't love me. If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this. She pulled her wrist free easily. Brandon didn't try to grab her again. The papers explain everything, Naomi said. I want the apartment downtown since I already moved into it. You can keep the house and the mortgage that comes with it. We'll split everything else according to what we each brought into the marriage and what we earned individually. My lawyer will be in touch. You already moved out? Brandon looked lost. Like his whole world was crumbling and he couldn't figure out how it happened so fast. 3 weeks ago, Naomi confirmed. I've been sleeping better than I have in years. With that, she turned and walked out of the restaurant. She didn't look back. She didn't cry. She just walked out into the cool evening air, got into her car, and drove to her new apartment where her best friend from college was waiting with ice cream and bad movies. Behind her, Brandon stood in the restaurant, holding the divorce papers he never saw coming, while his mistress called an Uber to escape the disaster. Other diners went back to their meals, whispering about the woman who handled betrayal with such strength and grace. And Naomi? She smiled for real as she drove through the city lights. She'd been terrified of this moment for weeks, but now that it was done, she felt lighter than air. The worst part was over. Now her new life could finally begin. 3 months earlier, everything had been different. Naomi had woken up on a Tuesday morning thinking her marriage was fine. Not perfect, maybe. Brandon had been distant lately, working late more often, but she chalked it up to stress at his job. He ran a car dealership with his business partner, and sales had been down. That's what he'd told her anyway. She'd made coffee that morning just like every morning. Brandon's phone had buzzed on the kitchen counter while he was in the shower. Naomi wouldn't normally look, but it kept buzzing. 3 texts in a row. Then a 4th. She'd walked over, thinking maybe it was an emergency. The texts were from someone saved as V in his contacts. No photo. No full name. Just V. The preview on the lock screen had shown enough. Last night was amazing. I miss you already. Can't wait until Friday when we can spend the whole night together. Naomi's hand had started shaking. She'd picked up the phone and by some miracle or curse, it had unlocked. Brandon must have forgotten to turn the Face ID back on after his software update. The text thread with V had gone back months. Hundreds of messages. Photos. Videos. Plans for dates. Inside jokes. Everything you'd expect from 2 people in a relationship. She'd felt her stomach drop. Her vision had blurred. But she hadn't cried. Not then. Instead, she'd taken her own phone and photographed everything she could. She'd scrolled back through weeks of messages, snapping pictures of the most damning ones. Screenshots of Brandon saying he loved this woman. Screenshots of him complaining about his marriage. Screenshots of him making detailed plans to sneak away with her. When she'd heard the shower turn off, she'd put his phone back exactly where it was and gone to the bedroom to get ready for work. Brandon had come out of the bathroom, kissed her cheek, grabbed his phone, and headed off to the dealership. Normal as could be. Like he wasn't living a double life. Naomi had called in sick that day. She'd sat on the couch in her bathrobe until noon, just staring at the wall. Then she'd made a decision. She wasn't going to fall apart. She wasn't going to confront him without a plan. She was going to be smart about this. The first call she'd made was to her friend's divorce lawyer. His name was Thomas Patterson and he was known for being tough. When Naomi had explained the situation, Thomas had told her to come in immediately. Don't confront your husband yet, Thomas had said during that first meeting. His office was on the 20th floor of a downtown building with a view of the river. If he knows you know, he'll start hiding assets. He'll delete evidence. He'll make this harder for you. Right now, you have the advantage because he thinks he's getting away with it. So what do I do? Naomi had asked. She'd felt numb. The crying would come later, but right then she just felt empty. You gather evidence, Thomas had said. Document everything. If he's spending money on this affair, we need proof. If he's using joint accounts, we need records. I'm also going to recommend you hire a private investigator. It's not cheap, but it's worth it. Naomi had agreed to everything. She'd written a check from her personal account for the retainer fee. The account Brandon didn't know about because it was funded by the trust fund her grandmother had left her. That money had always been hers alone, and she'd never mixed it with their joint finances. The private investigator's name was Rita Coleman. She was a woman in her 50s who'd been doing this work for 20 years. She had short gray hair and sharp eyes that didn't miss anything. Cheating spouses are predictable, Rita had told Naomi at their first meeting. They think they're so clever, but they all make the same mistakes. Your husband will be no different. Rita had been right. Within a week, she'd followed Brandon to a hotel downtown where he'd met Veronica. She'd photographed them going in together and coming out 3 hours later. She'd followed Veronica home and gotten her full name, address, and employment information. Veronica worked as a dental hygienist at a clinic across town. Over the next 2 months, Rita had documented everything. She'd found out Brandon was paying for an apartment in Veronica's name. She'd discovered he'd taken Veronica on a weekend trip to the beach and told Naomi he was at a dealership conference. She'd even found out Brandon and Veronica had met at a car show 8 months ago, which meant this affair was serious, not just some random fling. The evidence had piled up. Naomi had kept it all in a locked folder on her laptop. She'd also kept living her normal life, which had been the hardest part. Coming home to Brandon every night. Cooking dinner with him. Sleeping next to him. Pretending everything was fine while knowing he was texting another woman right there beside her in bed. She'd cried plenty during those 2 months. She'd cried in her car during lunch breaks. She'd cried in the shower. She'd cried late at night when Brandon was snoring next to her, completely unaware that she knew everything. But she'd never cried in front of him. She'd never given anything away. Meanwhile, Thomas had been working on the legal strategy. He'd helped her separate her finances carefully. She'd opened a new bank account at a different bank and had her paychecks deposited there instead of the joint account. She'd moved money from their joint savings a little at a time, nothing big enough to raise red flags, just taking back what she'd contributed over the years. You're entitled to half of everything earned during the marriage, Thomas had explained. But your inheritance is yours alone. We need to make sure it stays protected. We also need to prove he spent marital assets on his affair. That will help our case. Naomi had started looking for apartments in her spare time. She'd told Brandon she was working late at her marketing job, but really she'd been touring places to live. She'd finally found a perfect one-bedroom apartment in a modern building downtown. It had huge windows, a balcony, and a doorman. It was expensive, but she could afford it with her salary and inheritance. She'd signed the lease and started moving things slowly. A box here, a bag there. Things Brandon wouldn't notice missing. Her favorite books. Her good jewelry. Her important documents. Her grandmother's china. She'd moved it all out piece by piece, storing it in her new apartment that Brandon didn't know existed. She'd also opened new credit cards in her name only. She'd changed her passwords on all her accounts. She'd made copies of their tax returns, bank statements, and investment records. She'd photographed everything in their house that was valuable. She'd been thorough because Thomas had taught her to be thorough. The more prepared you are, the smoother this will go, he'd told her. And the less power he'll have to hurt you financially. Her family had been the hard part. She'd had to tell her mother what was happening, and her mother had wanted her to confront Brandon immediately. How can you just keep living with him? Her mother had demanded over the phone. How can you sleep next to him knowing what he's doing? Because I need to protect myself first, Naomi had explained. If I blow up now, I'll lose my advantage. I need to be smart about this, Mom. Her mother hadn't liked it, but she'd understood. She'd offered to help however she could. Naomi had asked her to just be there when she finally pulled the trigger on the divorce. Her mother had promised she would be. Her friends from work had noticed she seemed stressed, but she'd made excuses. Project deadlines. Family stuff. She hadn't told anyone the real reason except her best friend from college, who'd immediately offered to help her move and be there for moral support. The hardest night had been about 2 weeks before the anniversary dinner. Brandon had actually tried to be romantic. He brought home flowers and suggested they have a date night at home. They'd ordered takeout, watched a movie, and he'd held her hand on the couch. For a moment, Naomi had almost broken. She'd almost asked him why he was doing this. Why he was trying to be sweet when he was seeing someone else. But she'd held her tongue. She'd smiled and enjoyed the evening because she'd known it would be one of the last peaceful nights before everything exploded. That night, after Brandon had fallen asleep, she'd gone to the bathroom and cried as quietly as possible. She'd grieved the marriage she'd thought she had. She'd grieved the man she'd thought Brandon was. And then she'd dried her tears, washed her face, and gone back to bed. The next morning, she'd called Thomas and told him she was ready. I want to serve him the papers on our anniversary, she'd said. He made plans with her that night. I know because I saw the text. He told me he had to work late, but I know he's planning to take her to that Italian restaurant where we had our first date. Thomas had paused on the phone. Are you sure you want to do it that way? It's going to be public. I'm sure, Naomi had said firmly. I want him to know that I knew. I want him to understand that I planned this. I want him to realize I'm not the naive wife he thought I married. And honestly, I want her to be there when it happens. I want her to see what kind of man she's involved with. A man who would make plans with his mistress on his anniversary. Then let's do it, Thomas had agreed. The papers had been filed with the court a week before the anniversary. Everything had been ready. Naomi had just been waiting for the right moment. The most dramatic moment. The moment when Brandon would be sitting there with Veronica, feeling smug and clever, thinking he'd pulled off another successful deception. And she'd walked in there and pulled the rug out from under both of them. Now, driving away from the restaurant, Naomi felt proud of herself. She'd executed the plan perfectly. She'd stayed strong. She hadn't given Brandon the satisfaction of seeing her break down. Her phone buzzed with texts from Brandon. She didn't even look at them. She'd blocked his number as soon as she'd gotten to her car. From now on, all communication would go through their lawyers. She didn't need to hear his excuses or his apologies. She didn't need his promises to change or his attempts to manipulate her emotions. She was done. And it felt incredible. The first week after serving the divorce papers was chaos. Brandon called everyone they knew, trying to paint himself as the victim. He told his mother that Naomi had left him out of nowhere with no explanation. He told their mutual friends that she'd overreacted to a minor indiscretion. He even showed up at her new apartment building, but the doorman turned him away because Naomi had already added him to the do not allow list. His lawyer contacted Thomas within 3 days. Brandon wanted to talk settlement. He wanted to negotiate. Most of all, he wanted to avoid going to court where all his dirty laundry would become public record. He's offering you $40,000 to walk away quietly, Thomas had told Naomi during a phone call. He keeps the house, you get a cash payout, and you both move on. Naomi had actually laughed. 40,000? He spent more than that on his girlfriend. Tell him no. We're going to court. That's what I hoped you'd say, Thomas had replied, and she could hear the smile in his voice. Meanwhile, Naomi was settling into her new life. The apartment felt like a sanctuary. She'd furnished it with things she actually liked, not the boring traditional furniture Brandon had insisted on for the house. She'd bought a bright yellow couch, colorful artwork for the walls, and plants for every room. She'd made it hers. Work had become her refuge too. She told her boss about the divorce, and he'd been surprisingly supportive. He'd given her some extra flexibility with her schedule for lawyer meetings, and he'd also mentioned that a senior marketing position was opening up soon. Naomi had been with the company for 6 years, and she'd been hoping for a promotion. Maybe this was her chance. But Brandon wasn't making things easy. He kept trying to contact her through other people. He'd gotten her coworker's number somehow and had that person pass along messages. He'd sent flowers to her office with a card that said, "We need to talk." Naomi had donated the flowers to a nursing home and thrown away the card. The most disturbing incident happened on a Thursday evening. Naomi had come home from work to find Brandon sitting in the lobby of her building. The doorman looked apologetic. "He said he'd leave if you didn't come down," the doorman explained. "I told him I'd call the police, but he said he'd go before they arrived. I didn't want to cause a scene." "It's okay," Naomi had said, though her heart was pounding. "I'll handle it." She'd approached Brandon carefully. He looked terrible. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair was messy, and he had dark circles under his eyes like he hadn't slept in days. "Naomi, please just talk to me for 5 minutes, he'd begged. "That's all I'm asking." "We have nothing to discuss," Naomi had said firmly. "Everything goes through our lawyers." "This is insane." Brandon had stood up, raising his voice. The doorman had stepped closer, ready to intervene. "We've been together for 10 years, and you won't even have a conversation with me? What happened to you? What happened to me?" Naomi had felt anger rise in her chest. "You happened to me, Brandon. You lied to me for months. You spent our money on another woman. You made plans with her on our anniversary. You destroyed our marriage. And now you want me to feel sorry for you? I made a mistake." Brandon's voice had cracked. "People make mistakes, Naomi. You're acting like I'm some monster, but I'm just a guy who messed up. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Can't we at least try to work through this?" "No," Naomi had said simply. "I don't want to work through it. I don't want to go to counseling. I don't want to hear about why you did it or how sorry you are. I just want to be divorced and move on with my life." "You're really going to throw away 10 years? Brandon had asked desperately. "You already threw them away," Naomi had replied. "I'm just making it official. Now leave, Brandon. If you come here again, I'm filing for a restraining order." She turned and walked to the elevator. She hadn't looked back even though she'd heard him call her name. The elevator doors had closed and she'd ridden up to her floor with her hands shaking. But she'd done it. She'd stood her ground. The restraining order had become necessary 2 days later when Brandon had shown up at her office building. Security had escorted him out, but not before he'd caused a scene in the lobby. Naomi had filed the paperwork that afternoon, and a judge had granted a temporary restraining order. Brandon had to stay at least 500 feet away from her at all times. Meanwhile, things were falling apart for him in other ways. His business partner, a guy named Greg, had reached out to Naomi's lawyer. Apparently, Brandon had been using business funds for personal expenses, including some of his spending on Veronica. Greg wanted to make sure Naomi knew about it because it affected the divorce settlement. "He's been cooking the books," Thomas had explained to Naomi. "He took out business loans but used the money for personal things. Greg is furious because it puts the dealership in a bad financial position. He's considering dissolving the partnership." "Will that affect my settlement?" Naomi had asked. "Actually, it helps you," Thomas had said. "It shows a pattern of financial dishonesty. It makes him look worse in front of a judge. And it means his assets are worth less than he claimed, which means we can argue you're entitled to more of the liquid assets to compensate." The situation with Veronica was dissolving too, according to Naomi's friend who still followed Brandon on social media. Apparently, Veronica hadn't appreciated being dragged into a public divorce drama. She'd expected Brandon to leave his wife quietly, not for the wife to blow everything up spectacularly. The reality of being with a man going through a messy divorce wasn't as exciting as sneaking around had been. Brandon had posted something vague on social media about going through difficult times and learning who your real friends are. Naomi had rolled her eyes when she'd seen the screenshot. He was playing the victim just like she'd known he would. But she didn't care. She'd blocked him on every platform. She'd blocked Veronica too. She'd blocked anyone who might try to pass along messages from either of them. She was building new walls, healthy walls, around her new life. Her apartment was coming together beautifully. She'd hung curtains, arranged her books, and set up a small workspace by the window. She'd started cooking again, actually enjoying it now that she was only cooking for herself. She could make whatever she wanted without worrying about whether Brandon would like it. She'd also started going to therapy. Her therapist was a woman named Dr. Harris who specialized in helping people through divorce and betrayal. Naomi had been skeptical at first, but after a few sessions she'd realized how much she needed it. "You're allowed to be angry," Dr. Harris had told her. "You don't have to be calm and collected all the time. What he did was deeply wrong and it's okay to feel angry about it." "I am angry," Naomi had admitted. "I'm furious, but I'm also scared of my anger. What if I let myself feel it and I can't stop? What if it consumes me?" "Anger won't consume you if you process it healthily," Dr. Harris had explained. "It's when we bottle it up and pretend we're fine that it becomes destructive. You need to let yourself feel it, work through it, and then let it go." Naomi had started journaling as part of her therapy. She'd write down all the things she wished she could say to Brandon. All the hurt and rage and disappointment. She'd fill pages and pages, and then she'd close the journal and feel a little bit lighter. She'd also joined a divorce support group that met every Tuesday evening at a community center. At first she'd felt out of place. Some people were crying, some were angry, some seemed lost. But after a few weeks she'd started to feel like she belonged there. These people understood what she was going through in a way her friends who'd never been married couldn't. One woman in the group, a lady named Patricia who was in her 60s, had given her some advice that stuck with her. "The best revenge is living well," Patricia had said. "My ex-husband thought I'd fall apart without him. Instead, I went back to school, got my real estate license, and now I'm making more money than he ever did. Every success I have is proof that I never needed him. That's better than any revenge plot." Naomi had taken that advice to heart. She wasn't going to waste energy plotting revenge against Brandon. She was going to focus on building the best possible life for herself. That would hurt him more than anything else she could do. Her family had been supportive too. Her mother called every day to check on her. Her sister came over on weekends to help her decorate and just keep her company. Her dad, who usually wasn't very emotional, had told her he was proud of how strong she was being. "That boy never deserved you," her dad had said. "I always thought you could do better, but you loved him, so we accepted him. Now you get your chance to find someone who actually deserves you. Or don't. You don't need a man to be happy." Brandon's family had been a different story. His mother had called Naomi crying, begging her to reconsider. Naomi had listened politely and then explained that this wasn't a decision she'd made lightly. Brandon's mother had tried to make excuses for him, saying men sometimes made mistakes when they felt neglected at home. That had made Naomi angry. She'd cut the conversation short and blocked Brandon's mother's number too. She didn't need that negativity in her life. She refused to accept any blame for Brandon's choice to cheat. He'd been a grown man who'd made his own decisions. If he'd been unhappy in the marriage, he should have talked to her or suggested counseling. Instead, he'd sneaked around behind her back for months. No, she wouldn't accept any blame for this. The divorce proceedings were moving forward. Depositions were scheduled. Financial documents were being exchanged. Thomas was building a strong case, and Brandon's lawyer seemed to know his client didn't have much to stand on. He wants to settle, Thomas told her after a particularly contentious negotiation session. He's willing to give you more money to make this go away quietly. How much more? Naomi had asked. $75,000, plus he pays all the legal fees for both sides. Naomi had thought about it. That was a significant amount of money. It would be a fresh start fund. But it also felt like letting him off easy. Can we do better in court? She'd asked. Maybe, Thomas had said honestly. But court is risky. Judges can be unpredictable. And it will drag this out another 6 months at least. You have to decide what's worth more to you. Potentially getting more money, or being done with this and moving on with your life. Naomi had taken a few days to think about it. She talked to Dr. Harris about it. She'd talked to her support group about it. She'd made a list of pros and cons. In the end, she decided to reject the settlement. Not because she wanted more money, but because she wanted Brandon to face the consequences of his actions in court. She wanted the judge to see all the evidence of his affair and his financial dishonesty. She wanted it on the public record. And yes, maybe part of her wanted him to suffer through the humiliation of having his dirty laundry aired in public. We're going to trial, she told Thomas. Good, he'd replied. Because I think we can win big. 3 weeks later, Naomi walked out of her apartment building to head to work and found Veronica standing on the sidewalk. For a moment they just stared at each other. Naomi's first instinct was to walk past her without saying anything, but Veronica stepped into her path. I need to talk to you, Veronica said. She looked different from that night at the restaurant. No makeup. Hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Wearing jeans and a sweatshirt instead of a nice dress. I have nothing to say to you, Naomi replied, trying to step around her. Please, Veronica grabbed her arm. Just hear me out. Naomi looked down at the hand on her arm until Veronica let go. You have 30 seconds. I'm sorry, Veronica said quickly. I know that doesn't mean anything to you, but I am. I didn't know he was going to do that. Show up at the restaurant with me on your anniversary. He told me you two were separated. He said you were already living apart and just hadn't filed papers yet. I believed him. And you think that makes it better? Naomi asked coldly. You still dated a married man, separated or not. I know. Veronica looked down at her feet. I made a mistake. But he lied to me too. He told me he loved me. He told me he was going to leave you. And then after you served him those papers, he called me crying and begging me to help him win you back. He said I meant nothing. That I was just a mistake. Why are you telling me this? Naomi checked her watch. She was going to be late for work. Because I want you to know the truth, Veronica said. He's not who either of us thought he was. And also, she hesitated. He's been calling me nonstop, showing up at my work. He's obsessed with getting you back, but when you won't talk to him, he comes to me and acts like we're still together. Then he gets mad at me for ruining his marriage. I can't take it anymore. I wanted to warn you that he's not stable right now. I have a restraining order against him, Naomi said. He can't come near me. And I'm sorry he's harassing you, but that's not my problem. You made your choices just like he made his. Now you both have to live with the consequences. I understand, Veronica nodded. I just wanted to apologize. For whatever that's worth. Naomi looked at this woman who'd helped destroy her marriage. Part of her wanted to scream at her. Part of her wanted to tell her off. But mostly she just felt tired. I don't forgive you, Naomi said honestly. And I don't want anything to do with you. Stay away from me and handle Brandon however you need to. But don't come here again. She walked past Veronica without looking back. Her hands were shaking and her heart was racing, but she'd done it. She'd faced the other woman and hadn't broken down. She'd been strong. That evening she called Thomas and reported the incident. He added Veronica to the restraining order petition just to be safe. And then Naomi went home, made herself dinner, and watched a movie on her couch. Her new couch. In her new apartment. Her new life. Things were getting better. Slowly but surely they were getting better. The promotion came on a Thursday morning. Naomi's boss, Richard, called her into his office with a smile on his face. She'd been working on a major campaign for their biggest client, and it had gone better than anyone expected. Sales were up 30%, and the client was thrilled. "I've been watching your work over the past few months," Richard said. "Despite everything you've been dealing with personally, you've never let it affect your performance here. In fact, you've been exceeding expectations. I'm offering you the senior marketing director position. 20% raise, better benefits, and you'd be managing a team of 6 people." Naomi had felt tears prick her eyes, but these were good tears. Happy tears. "Yes," she'd said immediately. "Absolutely yes." Richard had shaken her hand and welcomed her to the leadership team. When Naomi had left his office, she'd wanted to call someone to share the good news. Her first instinct had been to call Brandon, and then she'd remembered. That was her old life. She didn't share things with him anymore. Instead, she called her mother, who'd screamed so loud Naomi had to hold the phone away from her ear. Then she texted her sister, who'd responded with about 50 celebration emojis. Her friends from her support group had congratulated her at that week's meeting. Everyone was genuinely happy for her. But the best part had been calling her best friend from college, who'd been there through all of this. "You deserve this so much," her friend had said. "Remember when you were crying on my couch after you served those papers? You said you'd never be happy again. Look at you now." "I did say that," Naomi remembered. "I actually believed it too." "And now?" her friend asked. "Now I think I might actually be happy," Naomi admitted. "Not like before. Different. But maybe better." Work became even more fulfilling after the promotion. She loved managing her team and working on bigger, more creative projects. She stayed late some nights not because she had to, but because she genuinely enjoyed what she was doing. For the first time in years, she felt like she was building something that was hers alone. She'd also started reconnecting with old friends she'd lost touch with during her marriage. Brandon had never been very social, and he'd always complained when she wanted to go out with friends. Slowly, over the years, she'd stopped making plans. She'd turned down invitations. She'd let friendships fade because it was easier than dealing with Brandon's mood when she came home. Now she was rebuilding those connections. She'd met up with 3 college friends for brunch one Sunday, and they talked and laughed for hours. It felt so good to be around people who remembered her from before Brandon, who knew who she really was underneath the wife role she'd been playing. "You seem different," one friend had observed. "Lighter somehow." "I feel lighter," Naomi had agreed. "Like I've been carrying something heavy for years and finally put it down." She'd also started taking care of herself in ways she'd neglected. She'd joined a gym and started going 3 mornings a week before work. She'd started getting regular manicures and haircuts. She'd bought new clothes that made her feel confident and beautiful. She'd been taking care of everyone else for so long that she'd forgotten to take care of herself. Dr. Harris had noticed the change too. "You're doing the work," she'd said during one session. "You're not just surviving anymore. You're building a life you actually want to live." "It's weird," Naomi had said. "I thought I'd be more bitter. I thought I'd spend all my time angry at Brandon. But mostly I just feel free." "That's healthy," Dr. Harris had assured her. "Anger is natural, but you've processed it. Now you're moving forward. That's exactly what you should be doing." The divorce proceedings were still ongoing. There had been several more depositions. Brandon's financial situation was a mess, which actually worked in Naomi's favor. The court could see that he'd been irresponsible with money, which supported her claim that she needed to be compensated for his misuse of their joint funds. Thomas had called her with updates regularly. "His lawyer is pushing hard for settlement again," he'd said during one call. "They really don't want this going to trial. They're up to $100,000 now, plus he covers all legal costs." "What do you think I should do?" Naomi had asked. "I think you could get more in court," Thomas had said honestly. "But I also think $100,000 and no legal fees is a solid offer. It's your call. What matters more to you right now?" Naomi had thought about it for a long time. The truth was she didn't need Brandon's money. Her promotion meant she was making good money on her own. Her inheritance was secure. Taking his money felt good in a petty way, but it also meant staying connected to him longer. "Counter with 125 and I'll take it," she'd said finally. "But he has to agree to no contact outside of what's legally required. And I want it written into the agreement that he can never try to reach out to me through friends or family. If he violates that, he pays me an additional $10,000. "I like the way you think," Thomas had laughed. "I'll draw up the counteroffer." Brandon had accepted the counteroffer within 24 hours. He'd obviously been desperate to end this. Naomi had signed the papers in Thomas's office, and just like that, she was going to be a divorced woman with a healthy bank account and absolutely no ties to her ex-husband. "How do you feel?" Thomas had asked after she'd signed. "Rich," Naomi had joked. Then more seriously, relieved. This is really ending. The celebration had been small but meaningful. Her mother and sister had taken her out to dinner at a nice restaurant. They'd toasted to new beginnings and second chances. Her mother had cried happy tears and told her how proud she was. "You handled this with such grace," her mother had said. "You didn't let him break you. You didn't let bitterness consume you. You just kept moving forward." "I had help," Naomi had squeezed her mother's hand. "You and everyone else who supported me. I couldn't have done this alone." At her support group that week, she'd shared her news. Several people had applauded. Patricia, the older woman who'd given her advice before, had hugged her tight. "You're one of the success stories," Patricia had said. "Hold on to that when things get hard. Remember that you survived this and came out stronger." Naomi had started thinking about what she wanted for the future. Not about revenge or about Brandon, but about what would make her happy. She'd always wanted to travel more, but Brandon had never been interested. She'd always wanted to take painting classes. She'd always wanted to volunteer at an animal shelter. She'd started making a list of goals. Not marriage goals or family goals or career goals necessarily. Just life goals. Things that would bring her joy and fulfillment. Things that were just for her. She'd booked a solo trip to Miami for a long weekend. She'd never traveled alone before and she was a little nervous but mostly excited. She wanted to prove to herself that she could do it. That she didn't need anyone else to have adventures. She'd also signed up for a painting class at a local art studio. It met every Wednesday evening for 8 weeks. She'd gone to her first class the previous week and had loved it. She was terrible at painting, but that wasn't the point. The point was doing something creative and fun just because she wanted to. And she'd started volunteering at an animal shelter on Saturday mornings. She'd walk dogs and play with cats for a few hours each week. The animals didn't care about her divorce or her past. They just wanted love and attention, and she had plenty of both to give. Her apartment was fully decorated now. It looked like something out of a magazine if she did say so herself. Bright and modern and full of personality. Nothing like the house she'd shared with Brandon, which had been all neutral colors and boring furniture. She'd hosted a small dinner party for some friends from work. She'd cooked a nice meal, served wine on her balcony, and laughed until her stomach hurt. It was the first time she'd entertained in her new place, and it felt amazing to have her own space to share. One of her co-workers had brought her boyfriend, and they'd been adorable together. Naomi had watched them interact and had felt a tiny pang of sadness for what she'd lost, but it had passed quickly. What she'd had with Brandon hadn't been real. It had been built on lies and pretending. Whatever she found next would be better because it would be authentic. "Are you dating yet?" one friend had asked her that night. "No," Naomi had answered honestly. "I'm not ready. And honestly, I'm kind of enjoying being single. I haven't been single since I was 23. I'm rediscovering who I am without a relationship defining me." "That's healthy," another friend had said. "Take all the time you need." But she'd noticed men noticing her. At the gym, the cute guy who worked the front desk always smiled at her. At the coffee shop she went to every morning, the barista had started drawing little hearts on her cup. At work, one of the sales guys had asked if she wanted to grab lunch sometime. She'd politely turned them all down. Not because she wasn't flattered, but because she wasn't ready. She was still healing. Still figuring herself out. Still learning to be comfortable in her own company. Dr. Harris had encouraged this. "There's no timeline for when you should start dating again," she'd said. "Don't let anyone pressure you. You'll know when you're ready." Naomi had also started writing again. She'd loved creative writing in college but had stopped when she'd gotten busy with work and marriage. Now she was writing short stories late at night, just for herself. They weren't very good, but that didn't matter. It felt good to create something. She'd filled 3 journals with her thoughts and feelings since the divorce started. Some entries were angry. Some were sad. Some were hopeful. But reading back through them, she could see her own growth. She could see herself becoming stronger and more confident with each passing week. Her father had called her one evening just to chat. "Your mother tells me you're doing really well," he'd said. "She says you seem happier than you've been in years." "I think I am," Naomi had admitted. "Is that weird? Shouldn't I be sadder about my marriage ending?" "You were sad," her father had pointed out. "You did your grieving. Now you're allowed to be happy. Don't feel guilty about that." "Thanks, Dad," Naomi had said, feeling emotional. I needed to hear that. The finalization date for the divorce was set for 6 weeks away. After that, it would be completely over. She'd be legally single again. The thought was both scary and exciting. But before that could happen, she had goals to accomplish. She was going to throw herself into her new position at work. She was going to take that trip to Miami and have the time of her life. She was going to finish her painting class and hang her terrible artwork in her apartment anyway because it made her happy. She was going to volunteer at the shelter and maybe even adopt a cat of her own. She was going to live her best life. Not to spite Brandon, though that was a nice side effect. But because she deserved it. She deserved happiness and peace and joy. She deserved a life that was hers, built on her own terms, full of things and people who appreciated her. And slowly but surely she was building exactly that. The day the divorce went to final court proceedings arrived on a cold morning in November. Naomi wore a navy blue pantsuit that made her look professional and confident. She'd gotten her hair done the day before and had slept well the night before. She was ready. Thomas met her outside the courthouse. "Remember, let me do the talking," he'd reminded her. "If the judge asks you direct questions, answer honestly but briefly. Don't let emotion take over." "I won't," Naomi had promised. She wasn't nervous. She'd been preparing for this for months. Brandon was already inside with his lawyer when they entered the courtroom. He looked terrible. He'd lost weight and not in a healthy way. His suit hung on him awkwardly and his face looked gaunt. When he saw Naomi, his expression was a mix of hope and desperation. She looked away. She'd promised herself she wouldn't feel sorry for him, and she wouldn't. He'd made his choices. Now he had to live with them. The judge was a woman in her 50s named Judge Martinez. She had a reputation for being fair but tough. She didn't tolerate nonsense in her courtroom, and she had no patience for people who wasted her time. Thomas presented their case methodically. He showed the bank statements proving Brandon had spent over $40,000 of their joint savings on Veronica. He showed hotel receipts, restaurant bills, and even the lease for the apartment Brandon had rented for his mistress. He showed text messages where Brandon had told Veronica he loved her while simultaneously telling Naomi everything was fine in their marriage. Brandon's lawyer tried to argue that the affair was irrelevant to the financial division of assets, but Judge Martinez shut that down quickly. "Financial infidelity is absolutely relevant," she'd said. "If Mr. Collins spent marital assets on an extramarital affair, that factors into the settlement. Continue, Mr. Patterson." Thomas had then presented evidence of Brandon's business dealings. With Greg's help, they'd proven that Brandon had been taking money from the dealership's accounts for personal use. He'd written himself checks without Greg's knowledge. He'd used the business credit card for personal expenses. He'd essentially been embezzling from his own company. These records show that over the past 18 months, Mr. Collins took approximately $60,000 from the business for personal use, Thomas had explained. His business partner was unaware of this until recently, and they're now in the process of dissolving their partnership. This demonstrates a pattern of financial dishonesty that extends beyond just the marital assets. Brandon's lawyer had tried to object, but the evidence was too clear. The judge looked increasingly unimpressed with Brandon as the hearing went on. When it was time for Brandon's side to present their case, his lawyer didn't have much. He tried to argue that Naomi had been cold and distant in the marriage, which had driven Brandon to seek affection elsewhere. He tried to suggest that Naomi's inheritance should be considered in the division of assets since they'd been married for 10 years. Thomas had demolished both arguments easily. He pointed out that there was no evidence of Naomi being cold or distant, and even if there was, that didn't justify adultery or financial deception. As for the inheritance, he'd shown documentation proving it was left specifically to Naomi by her grandmother and had never been commingled with marital funds. Then it was time for testimony. Brandon was called to the stand first. His lawyer asked him softball questions, trying to paint him as a man who'd made a mistake but was genuinely sorry. "Do you regret your affair with Ms. Veronica?" his lawyer asked. "Yes," Brandon had said, looking directly at Naomi. "It was the biggest mistake of my life. I love my wife. I never wanted to hurt her." When Thomas had his turn to cross-examine, he'd been merciless. "Mr. Collins, how long did your affair with Ms. Veronica last?" Thomas asked. "About 8 months," Brandon admitted. 8 months. "And during those 8 months, how many times did you tell Ms. Veronica that you loved her?" Brandon hesitated. "I don't know. Several times. According to the text messages we've submitted as evidence, you told her you loved her 43 times, Thomas corrected. You also told her that you wanted to leave your wife and start a life with her. Is that correct?" I was confused. I didn't mean it. But you said it. Multiple times. You made plans to leave your wife. You rented an apartment for your mistress. You spent thousands of dollars on her. These aren't the actions of someone who was confused, are they? Brandon couldn't answer that. Thomas continued. You've testified that you love your wife. But you also plan to take her to your favorite restaurant on your 10th wedding anniversary. Why did you make plans with your mistress that same night? Brandon looked down. I made a mistake. You made a choice, Thomas corrected. You chose to celebrate your anniversary with another woman while telling your wife you had to work late. That's not a mistake. That's a deliberate decision to deceive. Isn't that right? Yes, Brandon finally admitted. His voice was barely a whisper. Thomas had then gone into the financial issues. Mr. Collins, did you have your wife's permission to spend marital funds on your affair? No. Did you tell her you were taking money from your joint savings account? No. Did you think she'd approve if she knew? No. So you knew you were doing something wrong but you did it anyway. Is that correct? Yes. By the time Thomas was done, Brandon looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. The judge's expression made it clear she wasn't sympathetic. Then Naomi was called to testify. She'd been dreading this part, but once she was on the stand, she'd felt surprisingly calm. Thomas had asked her to describe discovering the affair, which she'd done calmly and without emotion. She'd explained how she'd found the texts, how she'd hired a private investigator, and how she'd discovered the full extent of Brandon's betrayal. How did you feel when you found out? Thomas had asked. Devastated, Naomi had answered honestly. I trusted him completely. I never suspected anything. Finding out that he'd been lying to me for months was like having the ground disappear under my feet. Did you consider trying to work things out with him? No, Naomi had said firmly. The level of deception was too great. It wasn't just the affair. It was all the lies. Every day he came home and pretended everything was normal, he was lying to me. Every time he said he loved me while he was saying the same thing to her, he was lying. I couldn't trust him anymore, and without trust, there's no marriage. Why did you wait 3 months before confronting him? Because I needed to protect myself legally and financially. My lawyer advised me to gather evidence and secure my assets before making my move. It was the hardest 3 months of my life, but it was necessary. Brandon's lawyer had tried to make her look cold and calculating during his cross-examination, but it had backfired. Naomi had simply explained that she'd been protecting herself from a man who'd proven he couldn't be trusted. Don't you think you were being manipulative by continuing to act normal while planning to divorce him? Brandon's lawyer had asked. No more manipulative than him acting normal while having an affair, Naomi had replied calmly. I was protecting myself. He was betraying me. There's a difference. After all the testimony was done, Judge Martinez had taken a short break to review everything. When she'd returned, her decision had been clear. I've reviewed the evidence and heard testimony from both parties, she'd said. It's clear to me that Mr. Collins engaged in both emotional and financial infidelity during this marriage. He spent significant marital assets on his extramarital affair without his wife's knowledge or consent. He also engaged in questionable business practices that demonstrate a pattern of financial dishonesty. Brandon had slumped in his chair. Mrs. Collins, on the other hand, protected her assets legally and appropriately once she discovered the infidelity. She followed proper procedures and acted in accordance with the law. Judge Martinez had then outlined her decision. Naomi would keep her inheritance entirely, as it was separate property. The house would be sold and the proceeds split evenly, but Brandon would have to pay Naomi back for half of the $40,000 he'd spent on Veronica before the split happened. Naomi would also get a larger share of their remaining joint savings to compensate for the money Brandon had taken from the business. All told, Naomi would receive about $150,000 more than if they'd split everything down the middle. Plus Brandon had to pay all court costs and legal fees for both sides. Furthermore, Judge Martinez had added, I'm granting Mrs. Collins's request for a permanent restraining order. Mr. Collins is to have no contact with Mrs. Collins except through lawyers regarding any remaining legal matters. If he violates this order, he'll be held in contempt of court. Brandon had looked like he'd been punched. His lawyer had put a hand on his shoulder, probably to stop him from saying something stupid. The marriage is dissolved, Judge Martinez had finished. Both parties are free to go. Next case. And just like that, it was over. Naomi was divorced. She'd walked out of the courthouse feeling lighter than she had in months. Thomas had shaken her hand and congratulated her. You did great in there, he'd said. And that was a very favorable settlement. Judge Martinez saw right through his act. "Thank you for everything," Naomi had said sincerely. "You helped me through the worst time of my life." "You helped yourself," Thomas had replied. "I just provided legal guidance. You're the one who had the strength to do what needed to be done." Outside the courthouse, Naomi's mother and sister were waiting. They'd both taken off work to be there for moral support, even though they weren't allowed in the courtroom. When Naomi came out, they'd hugged her tight. "How did it go?" her sister had asked. "I won," Naomi had said simply. "It's over. I'm divorced and I'm free." They'd gone out for lunch to celebrate. Naomi had ordered champagne even though it was noon on a Tuesday. She'd earned it. "What are you going to do with the settlement money?" her mother had asked. "I'm not sure yet," Naomi had admitted. "Maybe invest some of it. Maybe use some for home improvements. I've been thinking about maybe starting my own consulting business on the side eventually. This gives me a safety net to take that risk." "I'm so proud of you," her mother had said for probably the 100th time. "You could have fallen apart, but you didn't. You fought for yourself." That evening, Naomi had gone home to her apartment and just sat on her couch for a while, processing everything. She was divorced. After 10 years of marriage, she was single again. It felt surreal. She texted her support group to let them know how it went. Everyone had responded with congratulations and well wishes. Patricia had texted back, "Welcome to the other side. It gets even better from here." Naomi had called Dr. Harris to schedule a session and talk through her feelings. Even good endings brought up complex emotions, and she wanted to process them healthily. Then she'd ordered Thai food, put on comfortable clothes, and watched a comedy movie. She'd laughed until she cried, releasing all the tension she'd been holding in. Later that night, she'd gotten a text from an unknown number. It was Brandon. "I know I'm not supposed to contact you, but I need you to know I'm sorry. I ruined everything. I lost the best thing in my life. I hope someday you can forgive me." Naomi had stared at the message for a long moment. Part of her wanted to respond. Part of her wanted to tell him exactly how much he'd hurt her. But she didn't. Instead, she'd screenshot the message, sent it to Thomas with a note about the restraining order violation, and blocked the number. She didn't need closure from Brandon. She didn't need his apologies. She'd given herself closure by standing up for herself, protecting herself, and building a life she loved. That was enough. The day after the divorce was finalized, Naomi woke up feeling different. The relief she'd expected was there, but so was something else. Excitement. For the first time in months, maybe years, she felt genuinely excited about her future. She'd taken a personal day from work to just breathe and process everything. She'd slept in, made herself a nice breakfast, and sat on her balcony with coffee and a book. It was peaceful. No drama. No court dates. No lawyers calling. Just a normal, quiet morning. Her phone had buzzed with a text from her boss Richard. "Congratulations on your divorce being finalized. Take the time you need. Also, when you're back, let's discuss that Paris conference in March. I think you'd be perfect to represent our company." Paris. Naomi had always wanted to go to Paris. Brandon had promised to take her for their 5th anniversary, but it had never happened. He'd said they couldn't afford it, but now she knew he'd probably been spending that money on Veronica instead. She texted back immediately. "I'm very interested in the Paris conference. Let's talk when I'm back tomorrow." She'd then opened her laptop and started researching Paris. She'd bookmarked hotels, restaurants, museums. She'd made a list of things she wanted to see. The Eiffel Tower, the Louvre, those charming cafes she'd seen in movies. Maybe she'd arrive a few days early and actually be a tourist before the conference. The idea filled her with joy. She was going to Paris. By herself. For work and pleasure. It was exactly the kind of adventure she'd been craving. The settlement money had hit her bank account that morning. Seeing that number made her feel secure in a way she hadn't felt in years. She'd immediately scheduled a meeting with a financial advisor to discuss investing some of it wisely. The rest she'd keep liquid for opportunities like starting that consulting business she'd been thinking about. She'd spent the afternoon looking at business plans and researching what it would take to start a marketing consultancy. She had years of experience, great connections, and a solid reputation. She could do freelance work on the side while keeping her day job until the business was stable enough to go full-time. The more she thought about it, the more excited she became. She'd always wanted to be her own boss, to have control over her projects and clients. Being married to Brandon had made that feel impossible. He'd needed stability, a steady paycheck, insurance benefits. But now she only had to worry about herself. She'd called her sister that evening to talk through her ideas. Her sister had always been entrepreneurial and had great advice. "Do it," her sister had said immediately. "You're in the perfect position. You have savings, you have skills, and you have nothing holding you back. What are you waiting for?" "I guess I'm not waiting for anything anymore," Naomi had realized. "I'm just doing it." That week she'd registered a business name, Sterling Heights Consulting. She designed a simple logo, built a basic website, and created social media profiles. It wasn't fancy yet, but it was a start. She'd officially launched her side business. Her first client came from an unexpected place. One of the women from her divorce support group owned a small boutique and needed help with her marketing strategy. Naomi had offered to help, and they'd worked out a reasonable rate. It wasn't a huge project, but it was a beginning. The painting class had ended, and Naomi had actually gotten decent at it by the final session. She created a sunset landscape that didn't look completely terrible. She'd bought a frame for it and hung it in her living room. It made her smile every time she looked at it, not because it was beautiful, but because it represented her trying new things. She'd signed up for another class starting in January. This time it was pottery. She'd always thought making things with her hands would be therapeutic, and she was right. There was something satisfying about shaping clay into something useful or beautiful. Her volunteer work at the animal shelter had become one of her favorite parts of the week. She'd bonded with a 3-year-old cat named Pumpkin who'd been at the shelter for 6 months. He was orange and chubby and had the loudest purr she'd ever heard. Every Saturday she'd spend extra time with him, and he'd curl up in her lap like he'd been waiting for her all week. "You should adopt him," one of the shelter volunteers had suggested. "He clearly loves you." "I'm thinking about it," Naomi had admitted. "I've never had a cat before." "There's a first time for everything," the volunteer had smiled. "And I think you two would be great together." Naomi had thought about it all week. A cat would be companionship without the complications of a relationship. Pumpkin would be there when she came home, would keep her company on lonely evenings, and would love her unconditionally. No betrayal. No lies. Just a sweet cat who needed a home. The following Saturday she'd filled out the adoption paperwork. They'd scheduled a home visit to make sure her apartment was suitable, and then she'd be able to bring Pumpkin home. She was nervous but excited. This would be her first pet as an adult, chosen just by her with no one else's opinion factoring in. She'd spent the next week preparing. She bought a cat tree, toys, food bowls, and a cozy bed. She'd cat-proofed her apartment, moving breakable things to higher shelves and making sure there were no dangerous plants. She'd read articles about caring for cats and watched videos about making cats feel comfortable in new homes. When the day came to bring Pumpkin home, she'd been ridiculously excited. The shelter volunteer had helped her get him into the carrier, and he'd meowed plaintively the whole drive back to her apartment. But once she'd let him out in her living room, he'd explored cautiously and then jumped right onto her couch like he owned the place. "Welcome home, Pumpkin," Naomi had said, scratching behind his ears. He'd purred so loud it sounded like a motor. That night, Pumpkin had slept at the foot of her bed, and Naomi had felt less alone than she had in months. It was such a simple thing having a pet, but it made her apartment feel more like a home. Her trip to Miami had been amazing. She'd gone for a long weekend and had stayed at a small hotel near the beach. She'd spent her days walking on the sand, reading books, and eating at restaurants she'd chosen randomly. She'd gone to a salsa club one night and danced with strangers. She'd visited an art museum and a botanical garden. She'd done exactly what she wanted, when she wanted, without having to consider anyone else's preferences. It had been incredibly freeing. On her last night there, she'd sat on the beach at sunset and reflected on how much her life had changed. 6 months ago, she'd been trapped in a marriage with a man who didn't value her. Now she was single, successful, and genuinely happy. She'd built a life she loved from the ashes of one that had burned down. When she'd gotten back to work, Richard had confirmed her trip to Paris. The conference was in March, 3 months away. She'd been so excited she'd actually squealed in his office, which had made him laugh. "You deserve this," he'd said. "You've been working incredibly hard, and this conference will be great for your professional development. Plus, you'll love Paris." She'd started French lessons on an app, determined to at least learn some basic phrases before the trip. She'd practiced while cooking dinner, while walking Pumpkin. Yes, she'd bought him a harness and had started taking him for supervised outdoor time on her balcony, while getting ready in the morning. Her business was growing too. She'd gotten 3 more clients through word of mouth. Small businesses and startups that needed marketing help but couldn't afford big agencies. Naomi was perfect for them. She was skilled, affordable, and genuinely cared about helping them succeed. She'd been working late some nights after her day job, building strategies and creating content for her clients. It was exhausting but thrilling. This was hers. She'd built it herself. Every success was her own, and every challenge was an opportunity to learn. She'd also been making more time for friends. She'd hosted a game night at her apartment with people from work. She'd gone to concerts and art shows and farmers markets. She'd said yes to invitations she would have declined when she was married. She was rebuilding her social life and discovering that people actually enjoyed her company. She was funny. She was interesting. She was more than just someone's wife. One friend from work had mentioned that her brother had recently moved to town and was looking to meet new people. She'd suggested setting them up on a date. Naomi had politely declined. "I'm not ready yet," she'd explained. "I'm still figuring out who I am as a single person. Dating feels like it would complicate that." "I get it," her friend had said. "But whenever you are ready, let me know. He's a great guy." The truth was, Naomi wasn't sure when she'd be ready to date again. Maybe in 6 months. Maybe in a year. Maybe never. She was perfectly content being single right now. She liked coming home to just Pumpkin. She liked making decisions based only on what she wanted. She liked not having to worry about anyone else's feelings or needs. She talked about this with Dr. Harris. "Is it normal to not want to date? Everyone keeps asking if I'm seeing anyone, and I feel like they expect me to be looking." "There's no normal timeline," Dr. Harris had reminded her. "Some people jump right back into dating. Some people need years. Some people decide they're happier single. All of those are valid. What matters is what feels right for you." "Being single feels right," Naomi had said. "At least for now. Maybe that'll change eventually, but right now, I'm genuinely happy on my own." "Then that's exactly where you should be," Dr. Harris had smiled. Christmas was approaching, and for the first time in 10 years, Naomi wasn't stressed about it. She didn't have to worry about Brandon's difficult family. She didn't have to coordinate schedules with people she didn't particularly like. She could just enjoy the holiday however she wanted. She decided to host Christmas dinner at her apartment for her immediate family. Just her parents and sister. Intimate and cozy. She'd decorated her apartment with a small tree and lights. She'd hung stockings for everyone, including one for Pumpkin that she'd filled with cat toys and treats. She'd made a menu of all her favorite foods, not worrying about whether anyone else would like them. If they didn't, they could eat something else. But as it turned out, everyone loved the dinner she'd prepared. "This is the best Christmas we've had in years," her mother had said. "You seem so happy, honey. So light." "I am happy," Naomi had realized. "I'm really genuinely happy." Her sister had pulled her aside later in the evening. "I'm proud of you, you know. What you did took real courage. A lot of people would have stayed in that marriage because it was easier than starting over. But you chose yourself. You chose happiness. That's not easy." "It was the hardest thing I've ever done," Naomi had admitted. "But also the best decision I've ever made." As the year came to an end, Naomi reflected on everything that had happened. This time last year, she'd still been married to Brandon. She'd still been living a lie. She'd still been unhappy but pretending everything was fine. Now she was divorced, living alone, well, with Pumpkin, running her own side business, planning a trip to Paris, and genuinely excited about her future. She'd lost a husband but found herself in the process. On New Year's Eve, she'd gone to a party with friends from work. When midnight approached, everyone had gathered to count down together. As they'd shouted, "Happy New Year," and hugged each other, Naomi had felt overwhelming gratitude for her life. This year would be even better. She could feel it. This was her year. The year where she truly became the person she was always meant to be. And it all started with that choice she'd made months ago to hand Brandon those divorce papers instead of breaking down crying. That moment had changed everything. That moment had saved her life. February brought unexpected news. Naomi heard through a former mutual friend that Brandon's car dealership had closed. The partnership with Greg had officially dissolved, and neither of them had wanted to buy the other out. They'd sold the business at a loss and split what was left. Brandon was apparently working as a sales manager at a different dealership now, making a fraction of what he'd earned before. Naomi felt nothing hearing this news. No satisfaction. No pity. Just indifference. Brandon's life was no longer her concern. But Brandon wasn't done trying to make it her concern. Despite the restraining order, he'd found ways to reach out indirectly. He'd sent messages through people she barely knew. He'd left notes on her car in the parking garage at work. She'd reported those to security and they'd upgraded their camera system. He'd even tried to send her a letter through her mother, who'd promptly returned it unopened. He says he needs to talk to you, her mother had reported during their weekly phone call. He says it's urgent. I told him to go through his lawyer like he's supposed to. Thank you, Naomi had said. Please don't accept anything else from him. The situation came to a head on a Tuesday afternoon in mid-February. Naomi had been in her office reviewing a marketing proposal when building security called her extension. Miss Collins, there's a Brandon Collins here in the lobby asking to see you. He says it's an emergency. Should we let him up? Naomi's heart had started racing. No, absolutely not. I have a restraining order against him. Please ask him to leave, and if he refuses, call the police. She'd hung up and immediately called Thomas. Within 20 minutes, 2 police officers had arrived at her building. Brandon had apparently refused to leave, insisting he just needed 5 minutes to talk to Naomi. He'd been arrested for violating the restraining order. Thomas had called her that evening. He's been charged with contempt of court. He'll have to appear before Judge Martinez again. Given that this is his 3rd violation of the restraining order, she's likely to take it seriously. 3rd. Naomi had been surprised. I only reported 2 incidents. He also tried to contact you through your mother's Facebook account, remember? That counted as a violation too. The judge is going to be very unhappy with him. Good, Naomi had thought but didn't say out loud. She wasn't supposed to feel satisfaction about Brandon's troubles, but she did feel relieved that consequences were finally catching up with him. The contempt hearing happened the following week. Naomi had to be there to testify about the incidents. When she walked into the courtroom, Brandon looked even worse than he had at the divorce hearing. He'd gained the weight back but in an unhealthy way. His face was puffy and his eyes had dark circles. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. Judge Martinez had been harsh. Mr. Collins, you were explicitly ordered to have no contact with Ms. Collins outside of legal communications through your attorneys. You've violated that order 3 times now. What do you have to say for yourself? Brandon had stammered through an explanation about how he just needed to apologize, how he needed closure, how he couldn't move on until Naomi forgave him. The judge had been unimpressed. Mr. Collins, Miss Collins does not owe you forgiveness. She does not owe you closure. She does not owe you anything. You violated a court order. Not once but 3 times. I'm finding you in contempt of court and fining you $5,000. If you contact Miss Collins again in any way, I will hold you in jail for 30 days. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor, Brandon had whispered. Miss Collins, the judge had turned to Naomi. Do you feel safe? Not entirely, Naomi had admitted. He seems obsessed with contacting me. I don't know what it will take for him to stop. Judge Martinez had nodded. Mr. Collins, I'm also ordering you to attend therapy. You'll provide proof of attendance to the court every month for the next 6 months. If you miss even 1 session, you'll be jailed. If you contact Miss Collins in any way, you'll be jailed. This ends today. Do you understand me? Yes, Your Honor, Brandon had looked defeated. Naomi had left the courthouse feeling vindicated but also exhausted. Why couldn't Brandon just move on? Why was he making this so hard? Some people can't handle losing control, Dr. Harris had explained in their next session. Brandon thought he could have his cake and eat it too. He thought he could have an affair and keep you as his stable home base. When you took that power away from him, when you chose to leave, it shattered his worldview. He's not trying to win you back because he loves you. He's trying to win you back because he can't stand that you made a choice he didn't approve. That made sense to Naomi. It also made her grateful she'd gotten out when she did. Brandon's behavior was escalating, and she was glad there were legal protections in place. Meanwhile, her life continued to flourish. The Paris trip was approaching rapidly. She'd finalized her itinerary, booked tours, and had even splurged on a nice hotel near the Champs-Élysées. She'd bought new clothes for the trip, including a beautiful red dress for the conference gala. She'd also been featured in a local business magazine for her growing consulting firm. They'd done a profile on rising women entrepreneurs, and had interviewed her about starting her business. The article included a professional photo of her in her office at home, with pumpkin photobombing in the background, which had made her laugh. The publicity from the article had brought in more clients. Her side business was now making almost as much as her day job. She'd started seriously considering going full-time with the consultancy. But something else happened that made her reconsider her timeline. Her company announced they were restructuring. Richard called her into his office one morning with a grim expression. "I have bad news," he'd said. "The company is downsizing. They're cutting the entire marketing department and outsourcing to a contractor. I'm being offered a position in the New York office, but everyone else is being let go." Naomi had felt her stomach drop. When? End of March. You'll get a severance package and I'll give you the best recommendation letter you've ever seen. I'm so sorry, Naomi. The timing was actually perfect even if it didn't feel that way at first. She'd be going to Paris in early March for the conference. When she came back, she'd have a month to transition out of her job and ramp up her consulting business. The severance would give her a financial cushion while she built up more clients. It's going to be okay, Richard had assured her. You're talented and you have your own business already. You'll land on your feet. He was right. This was the universe pushing her to take the leap she'd been too scared to take on her own. She was going to be a full-time entrepreneur. It was terrifying and exciting all at once. She'd told her family that evening. Her mother had worried, of course, but her father had been supportive. You've got skills and savings, he'd said. You'll be fine. And if things get tight, you know we're here to help. I don't think things will get tight, Naomi had said, more confident than she felt. I have clients already. I just need to market myself better and grow the business. She'd spent the next weeks networking aggressively. She'd reached out to former colleagues and clients. She'd updated her website and social media. She joined professional organizations and attended networking events. She was building her brand and her client base deliberately and strategically. By the time Paris rolled around, she'd signed 3 new clients and had proposals out with 2 more. She was going to be okay. Better than okay. She was going to be successful. Paris was everything she dreamed it would be. The conference was informative and inspiring. She'd networked with marketing professionals from around the world. She'd exchanged business cards and made connections that could lead to future opportunities. She'd attended workshops and keynote speeches that gave her new ideas for her business. But the best part was the time she'd taken for herself. She'd arrived 3 days early and had spent them exploring the city. She'd climbed the Eiffel Tower and eaten croissants at sidewalk cafes. She'd wandered through the Louvre for hours, getting lost in art and history. She'd walked along the Seine at sunset, feeling more at peace than she'd felt in years. She'd also done something brave. She'd gone to a nice restaurant alone one evening and had ordered a meal that took 2 hours to enjoy. She'd brought a book but had mostly just people watched and soaked in the atmosphere. A few years ago, eating alone would have made her self-conscious. Now she enjoyed her own company. On her last night in Paris, she'd attended the conference gala in her red dress. She'd danced, laughed, and celebrated with new friends from the conference. Someone had asked if she was married, and she'd said, divorced, without any shame or sadness. Just a fact. Something that had happened but didn't define her. When she'd gotten back home, Pumpkin had meowed at her for a full 5 minutes, clearly annoyed she'd left him, even though her sister had come by daily to feed him and give him attention. She'd picked him up and cuddled him, feeling grateful to be home. I missed you too, buddy, she told him. But I had an amazing adventure. The transition out of her day job went smoothly. Her last day was bittersweet. She'd made good friends there and she'd learned a lot. But she was ready for the next chapter. Richard had thrown her a going-away party and had given a speech about how talented she was and how she was going to do amazing things. Don't forget us little people when you're running a huge marketing empire, he joked. Never, Naomi had promised, hugging him goodbye. Her severance package had been generous. Combined with her settlement money and the income from her consulting business, she was in a strong financial position. She'd immediately reinvested some of the money into her business, upgrading her website and paying for advertising. She'd also hired a part-time assistant to help with administrative tasks so she could focus on the creative work. By early April, she was officially a full-time business owner. She'd converted her second bedroom into a proper office. She'd set business hours and had created systems for client management. She was professional and organized and completely in control of her own destiny. Life was good. Really good. She was making her own schedule, choosing her own clients, and doing work she genuinely enjoyed. She was making good money and building something that was entirely hers. And through it all, Brandon's absence was noticeable only in how much better her life was without him. She didn't miss him. She didn't think about him. She truly moved on. Until one day in late April when her doorbell rang unexpectedly. Naomi looked through the peephole cautiously. It wasn't Brandon. It was a delivery person with a large bouquet of flowers. She opened the door partway, keeping the chain lock engaged. Delivery for Naomi Collins, the person said cheerfully. Who are they from? Naomi asked. The delivery person checked the card. Just says congratulations. Want me to leave them here? Naomi accepted the flowers carefully, closed the door, and immediately read the card. Congratulations on your new business. You always were the smart one. Greg. She smiled. Brandon's former business partner had apparently seen the article about her consulting firm. It was nice to know not everyone from her past life was associated with bad memories. She texted Greg a thank you and put the flowers on her dining table. Pumpkin immediately tried to eat them, so she moved them to a higher shelf he couldn't reach. The rest of spring passed in a blur of activity. Her business was thriving beyond her expectations. She'd had to hire another part-time employee to keep up with demand. She'd moved out of her apartment office and rented a small commercial space in a shared office building downtown. It was professional and bright, with a view of the city and a coffee shop on the ground floor. She'd bought real office furniture, hung her business credentials on the wall, and had business cards professionally printed. She felt like a real entrepreneur now, not just someone working from home. Her client base had grown to include several mid-sized companies. She'd developed a reputation for being creative, reliable, and getting results. Word of mouth was bringing in new clients regularly. She'd even had to turn down projects because she was at capacity. "You need to hire more people," her assistant had told her. "You're leaving money on the table." Naomi had agreed. By June, she'd hired 2 full-time employees, a graphic designer and a content writer. They were both talented and eager, and they fit perfectly with her vision for the company. She'd also moved to a bigger office space to accommodate the growing team. It had a conference room, individual offices, and a break room. She'd decorated it in the same bright, modern style as her apartment. It was a space where people wanted to work. The business was now generating 6 figures in annual revenue, and it was only June. At this rate, she'd hit 7 figures within 2 years. She'd gone from being someone's wife to being a successful business owner in less than a year. It was surreal and wonderful. She'd also decided to buy a house. Not the house she'd shared with Brandon, that had been sold months ago as part of the divorce settlement. A new house. One she chose herself, with her own money, that reflected her own taste. She'd found a perfect townhouse in a trendy neighborhood. It had 3 bedrooms, a small yard, and a rooftop terrace. It needed some work, but she had the money to renovate it exactly how she wanted. The day she closed on the house, she'd called her parents to share the news. Her mother had cried happy tears. "My baby bought a house all by herself," her mother had sobbed. "I'm so proud of you." Naomi had moved in slowly over the following weeks, making each room perfect before moving on to the next. The living room was cozy and inviting. The kitchen was modern and functional. Her bedroom was a peaceful sanctuary with soft colors and comfortable furniture. She'd even created an art studio in one of the spare bedrooms where she could paint. The house felt like hers in a way the apartment never had. This was permanent. This was her foundation. This was home. Pumpkin loved the new house, especially the yard where he could lounge in the sun under supervision. Naomi had gotten him a little harness and leash, and they'd spend evenings together outside, her reading while he explored the garden. She'd hosted a housewarming party in July. She'd invited friends from her support group, colleagues from her old job, clients who'd become friends, and her family. The house had been full of laughter and conversation. Everyone had congratulated her on her beautiful home and her successful business. Patricia from the support group had pulled her aside. "Do you remember when you first came to group? You were so hurt and scared. Look at you now. You're thriving." "I couldn't have done it without all of you," Naomi had said sincerely. "That group saved me in those early days." "You saved yourself," Patricia had corrected. "We just cheered you on." That summer, Naomi had started dating casually. Nothing serious, just coffee or dinner with people she met through friends or networking events. She wasn't looking for a relationship, but she was open to meeting new people and having new experiences. She'd gone on dates with a lawyer, a teacher, and a guy who owned a bookstore. They'd all been nice, but there wasn't a spark with any of them. That was okay. She wasn't in a hurry. She was enjoying her life too much to settle for someone who wasn't amazing. Her business continued to grow. She'd been asked to speak at a marketing conference in September about building a business after divorce. She'd accepted, despite being nervous about public speaking. Her story might help other women going through similar situations. She'd also been approached by a publisher who wanted her to write a book about her experience. "Rising from Betrayal, How I Built Success After Divorce," they'd suggested as a title. She'd been intrigued. Maybe writing a book would help her process everything that had happened. Maybe it would help others too. She'd signed the book deal in August. She'd have a year to write it, and it would be published the following summer. She'd started writing immediately, finding it therapeutic to put her story into words. The manuscript was coming together beautifully. It wasn't just about the divorce. It was about rediscovering yourself, building a business, and creating a life you love. It was about strength and resilience and choosing happiness. In September, she'd given the speech at the marketing conference. She'd been terrified walking on stage, but once she'd started talking, the words had flowed naturally. She told her story honestly, including the pain and the fear, but also the triumph and the joy. When she'd finished, the audience had given her a standing ovation. Several women had come up to her afterward with tears in their eyes, thanking her for sharing. "You inspired me," one woman had said. "I've been staying in a bad marriage because I was scared of starting over. But if you can do it, maybe I can too." "You can," Naomi had told her firmly. "It won't be easy, but you can do it. And you'll be amazed at how strong you are." That night, Naomi had felt a sense of purpose she'd never experienced before. Her suffering had meaning. Her story could help others. That made everything she'd been through worthwhile. Her business hit $1 million in revenue in October. She'd celebrated with her team, buying champagne and cake. They'd worked so hard to build this together, and they deserved to celebrate the milestone. "What's next?" her graphic designer had asked. "World domination? Maybe," Naomi had joked. "But first, let's just keep doing great work for great clients." She'd also started giving back. She donated to women's shelters and organizations that helped people through divorce. She'd started a small scholarship fund for women starting their own businesses after leaving bad relationships. She wanted to use her success to help others who were where she'd been a year ago. By November, exactly 1 year after serving Brandon those divorce papers in the restaurant, Naomi's life was unrecognizable. She owned her own house. She ran a successful business with a team of 5 people. She was writing a book. She'd spoken at conferences. She'd been featured in multiple publications. She was genuinely, consistently happy. She'd celebrated the anniversary of her divorce by treating herself to a spa day. Full massage, facial, manicure, pedicure. She'd pampered herself completely. That evening, she'd looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back. This woman was confident, strong, successful, happy. This woman had built an entire life from scratch. This woman had turned betrayal into triumph. "Thank you," Naomi had whispered to her reflection. "Thank you for being brave enough to leave. Thank you for believing in yourself. Thank you for not giving up." She'd gone to bed that night with Pumpkin curled up beside her, feeling more at peace than she'd ever felt in her life. The divorce had been finalized for nearly a year when Naomi got a call from Thomas. Brandon wanted to talk to her. Not through lawyers. In person. He claimed he had something important to say. "Absolutely not," Naomi had said immediately. "He has a restraining order. He's supposed to stay away from me. He's asking the court to temporarily lift the restraining order for a supervised meeting," Thomas explained. "He says he's completed his therapy and needs closure. Judge Martinez wants to know how you feel about it." Naomi had thought about it for a long time. Part of her wanted to refuse on principle. She didn't owe Brandon anything, including closure. But another part of her was curious. What could he possibly have to say after all this time? "Would you be there?" she'd asked Thomas. "Yes. And a court officer. It would be in a neutral location. He couldn't touch you or threaten you. If he gets out of line, the meeting ends immediately." "Fine," Naomi had finally agreed. "But only because I want to hear what's so important that he's been violating restraining orders for a year." The meeting was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon in January at a mediation office downtown. Naomi had dressed in a power suit, applied her makeup carefully, and styled her hair. She'd wanted to look successful and unbothered. She'd wanted Brandon to see exactly what he'd lost. When she'd walked into the conference room, Brandon was already there. He'd cleaned himself up, lost weight, fixed his hair, bought new clothes. He looked more like the man she'd married than he had in court a year ago. But Naomi felt nothing. No attraction. No residual love. Not even anger anymore. Just indifference. "Hello, Brandon," she'd said coolly, sitting across from him with Thomas beside her. "Naomi," Brandon's voice cracked. "Thank you for agreeing to meet me." "You have 30 minutes, Thomas had said, checking his watch. "Say what you need to say." Brandon had taken a deep breath. "I've been in therapy for almost a year now. I've been working through why I did what I did. Understanding my patterns. Taking responsibility." Naomi waited. She wasn't going to make this easy for him. "I destroyed the best thing in my life," Brandon continued. "I was selfish and cruel. I took you for granted. I convinced myself that I deserved to have everything, my cake, and eat it too. I hurt you in ways I can never take back. Is there a point to this?" Naomi asked. "Because I don't need your apology. I've moved on." "I can see that," Brandon said quietly. I've seen the articles about your business. I heard you're speaking at conferences now, writing a book. You're doing amazing things. And you thought you should get credit for that somehow? Naomi's voice was sharp. You think because you hurt me and I survived it that you deserve praise? No, Brandon looked down at his hands. I know I don't deserve anything from you. I'm not here to ask for forgiveness or to try to get you back. I know that ship has sailed. I just needed you to know that I understand now what I did to you. I understand the damage I caused. Good for you, Naomi said. Is that it? I also wanted to tell you that I'm sorry, Brandon's voice shook. I know it doesn't change anything. I know it doesn't fix what I broke. But I am genuinely deeply sorry for hurting you. You deserved so much better than what I gave you. Naomi looked at him for a long moment. She'd dreamed about this moment in the early days. She'd imagined him begging for forgiveness, crying, pleading. She'd imagined herself either feeling satisfied at his pain or breaking down and forgiving him. But sitting there in that conference room, she felt neither. She just felt done. Thank you for the apology, she said finally. I'm sure it took courage to ask for this meeting and say all that. And I'm glad you're in therapy and working on yourself. That's good. You needed it. Brandon looked hopeful for a moment. But I don't forgive you, Naomi continued, and the hope died in his eyes. Not because I'm holding a grudge or because I'm still angry. I'm just not angry anymore. I'm indifferent. You're a stranger to me now. What you did shaped who I am, but you don't define me. I've built a life I love and you're not part of it. You never will be again. I understand, Brandon whispered. I hope you find happiness eventually, Naomi added, surprising herself with the sincerity. I hope you learn from your mistakes and become a better person. Not for me but for whoever you end up with next. They deserve someone who won't betray them. You're incredibly gracious, Brandon said, tears in his eyes. More than I deserve. I'm not being gracious, Naomi corrected him. I'm just being honest. I don't hate you, Brandon. I don't think about you enough to hate you. You're just someone I used to know. Someone who hurt me once but doesn't have power over me anymore. She'd stood up then, signaling the meeting was over. I hope therapy continues to help you. I hope you find what you're looking for. But don't contact me again. Not through courts. Not through friends. Not at all. This is goodbye. For real this time. Brandon had nodded, unable to speak through his tears. Naomi had walked out of that conference room with her head high. She'd gotten in her car, driven back to her office and continued with her day. The meeting hadn't given her closure because she'd already given that to herself. It had just confirmed what she already knew. She was completely, totally over him. That evening, she called Dr. Harris to talk through the meeting. How did it feel? Dr. Harris had asked. Anticlimactic, Naomi had admitted. I thought I'd feel something. Anger or satisfaction or sadness. But I just felt nothing. Is that normal? Perfectly normal, Dr. Harris had assured her. You've done the work. You've processed your feelings. You've moved on with your life. He's not important to you anymore. That's not cold or cruel. That's healthy. Naomi had felt relieved. She'd worried that her indifference made her heartless, but Dr. Harris was right. It was healthy. It meant she'd truly healed. A few days later, she'd received a letter from Judge Martinez's office. The restraining order was now permanent. Brandon could never contact her again for any reason. If he did, he'd go to jail immediately. The judge had noted in her order that Naomi had shown tremendous grace by agreeing to the meeting but that Brandon had no further claims to her time or attention. Naomi had filed the letter away and hadn't thought about it again. Valentine's Day came a month later. In the past, this day had made her anxious when she was married to Brandon. He'd always forgotten or half-heartedly gotten her something at the last minute. Now, single, she'd decided to spend it differently. She'd taken herself out to a fancy restaurant. She'd worn a beautiful dress, ordered an expensive meal and had dessert and wine. She'd brought a book and had read between courses. She'd celebrated herself and the life she'd built. The waiter had asked if she was waiting for someone and she'd smiled. No, I'm celebrating being single. He'd laughed and brought her a complimentary glass of champagne. To independence, he'd toasted. To independence, she'd agreed, clinking her glass against his. That night, she'd come home to her beautiful house, played with Pumpkin, and had video called her family to tell them about her day. They'd all laughed and celebrated with her. You're an inspiration, her sister had said. You're showing women everywhere that you don't need a man to be happy. You don't need someone else to complete you. You're complete on your own. Naomi had gone to sleep that night feeling content. She'd written in her journal, Today I celebrated myself. Today I honored the life I've built. Today I chose me and it felt incredible. Life continued to be good. Her business was expanding. Her book was nearly finished. She'd been invited to speak at more conferences. She'd been featured in a national magazine. Everything was coming together. And through it all, Brandon was just a footnote in her story. Not the villain. Not the victim. Just someone who'd once been part of her life and wasn't anymore. Someone whose betrayal had actually set her free to become who she was always meant to be. For that, in a twisted way, she was almost grateful. 2 years had passed since that night in the restaurant when Naomi had handed Brandon the divorce papers. 2 years since everything had fallen apart and then come back together better than before. It was November again, and Naomi was getting ready for an award ceremony. Her business had been nominated for Best New Marketing Firm by the local business association, and she'd been personally nominated for Entrepreneur of the Year. She stood in her bedroom looking at herself in the mirror. The woman staring back at her was radiant, confident, successful, happy. She wore a stunning navy dress that hugged her curves perfectly. Her natural hair was styled in elegant curls that framed her face. Her makeup highlighted her glowing skin and bright eyes. "You look beautiful," her mother said from the doorway. She'd come over to help Naomi get ready. "Absolutely stunning." "Thank you," Naomi smiled. "I feel beautiful." "Is that conceited?" "It's confident," her mother corrected. "And you've earned the right to feel that way." Pumpkin meowed from his perch on the bed and they both laughed. "Yes, you're beautiful too," Naomi told him, scratching his head. The awards ceremony was being held at a downtown hotel. As Naomi walked into the ballroom, she was greeted by dozens of people she knew. Clients, business partners, friends, her team. Everyone was there to support her. Her graphic designer gave her a hug. "Win or lose tonight, we're so proud of you. You built this company from nothing and look how far we've come." "We built it together," Naomi corrected. "I couldn't have done this without all of you." During dinner, she'd sat with her team and laughed at their jokes. She'd toasted to their success and thanked them for their hard work. She'd felt overwhelming gratitude for these people who'd believed in her vision and helped make it reality. When the awards were announced, her business won Best New Marketing Firm. She'd gone on stage with her team to accept the award, giving a short speech about hard work, resilience, and believing in yourself even when life knocks you down. "2 years ago, my life fell apart," she'd said to the audience. "I thought I'd lost everything. But what I actually lost was dead weight. What I gained was freedom. Freedom to build the life I always wanted. Freedom to take risks and chase dreams. Freedom to be authentically myself." The audience had applauded enthusiastically. Then came the Entrepreneur of the Year category. Naomi hadn't expected to win. The other nominees were all impressive business owners with years more experience than her. But when they'd announced her name, she'd been shocked. She'd walked back up to the stage in a daze. The presenter had handed her a beautiful glass award and had shaken her hand. She'd stood at the microphone looking out at the audience and had felt emotion well up. "I don't have a prepared speech because I didn't think I'd win," she'd admitted with a laugh. "But I want to thank everyone who supported me through the hardest time of my life and celebrated with me during the best times. To my family who never doubted me. To my friends who kept me sane. To my therapist who taught me to be kind to myself. To my team who works so hard every day. And to every woman out there who's wondering if she can start over after her life falls apart. You can. I promise you can. If I can do it, anyone can." The standing ovation had brought tears to her eyes. She'd left the stage with her award and had been immediately swarmed by people congratulating her. Later that night, after the ceremony, she'd gone out for drinks with her friends. They'd toasted to her success and laughed about the journey that had gotten her here. "Remember when you first served him those papers?" one friend had asked. "You were so nervous." "I was terrified," Naomi had admitted. "I thought my life was ending. Turns out it was just beginning." She'd gotten home late that night, slightly tipsy from champagne, and had immediately told Pumpkin all about her awards. He'd been unimpressed and had demanded food instead. She'd laughed and fed him, then had placed her awards on the mantel in her living room. The next morning she'd woken up with a slight headache but a huge smile. She'd made coffee and had sat on her back patio, watching the sunrise and thinking about how far she'd come. Her book had been published that summer and had become a surprise bestseller. It had resonated with thousands of women going through divorces or leaving bad relationships. She'd gotten emails from readers thanking her for her honesty and telling her how her story had inspired them to make changes in their own lives. She'd done book signings and podcast interviews. She'd been invited to speak at women's conferences and divorce support groups. Her story had reached far beyond what she'd ever imagined. And through it all, she'd remained grounded. She hadn't let success change who she was. She still volunteered at the animal shelter on Saturdays. She still had dinner with her family every Sunday. She still attended her support group meetings occasionally to encourage new members who were just starting their journey. Patricia had become a close friend. They had coffee together monthly and talked about life, business, and everything in between. Patricia had started her own consulting business helping people over 50 start new careers, and Naomi had been helping her with marketing. "We're like the dynamic duo of starting over," Patricia had joked during one of their coffee dates. Proof that it's never too late to build the life you want. Naomi's business continued to thrive. She now had a team of 12 people and was looking at opening a second office in another city. She'd been approached by investors interested in helping her expand nationally. She was considering it, but she wanted to make sure growth happened sustainably. She'd also started dating someone new. His name was Joel, and she'd met him at a business networking event 6 months ago. He was a software developer who'd started his own company around the same time she'd started hers. They'd bonded over the challenges and triumphs of entrepreneurship. Joel was kind, funny, and emotionally intelligent. He respected her boundaries and her independence. He celebrated her success without feeling threatened by it. He was everything Brandon hadn't been. But Naomi was taking things slowly. They'd been dating for 6 months and hadn't made anything official. She was enjoying getting to know him without pressure or expectations. If it developed into something serious, great. If not, that was okay too. She was perfectly happy on her own. "I like him," she told Dr. Harris during one of their now monthly check-in sessions. "But I'm not in a hurry. I'm not trying to find someone to complete me. I'm already complete." "That's exactly the right attitude," Dr. Harris had said. "You're dating from a place of wholeness, not neediness. That's when the best relationships form." Naomi had also reconnected with some people from her past. Greg, Brandon's former business partner, had become a friend. They'd grab lunch occasionally and talk business. He told her that Brandon had moved to another state and was trying to rebuild his life there. "He asks about you sometimes," Greg had mentioned once. "I tell him you're doing great and he just nods. I think he finally understands what he lost." "I hope he's doing okay," Naomi had said, and she'd meant it. She held no ill will toward Brandon anymore. She'd forgiven him in her own way, not because he'd asked for it or earned it, but because holding on to anger would only hurt herself. Her father had noticed the change in her. "You're at peace," he'd observed during a family dinner. "Really at peace. Not just pretending." "I am," Naomi had agreed. "I've let go of all the bitterness and anger. I've forgiven Brandon not for him but for me. And I've forgiven myself for not seeing the signs sooner. I've made peace with the past and I'm excited about the future." On the 2-year anniversary of serving the divorce papers, Naomi had thrown a new life party at her house. She'd invited everyone who'd supported her through the divorce and the rebuilding process. Her family, her support group friends, her business team, her clients who'd become friends, and Joel. "2 years ago today, I took back my life," she'd said, raising a glass. "I was scared and hurt and didn't know if I'd survive. But I did more than survive. I thrived. And I couldn't have done it without all of you. Thank you for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. Thank you for celebrating my wins and supporting me through my struggles. Thank you for being part of my new life." Everyone had cheered and clinked glasses. The party had lasted late into the night, filled with laughter and music and joy. Later, after everyone had left and she was cleaning up, Joel had stayed to help. "You're remarkable, you know that?" he'd said, loading dishes into the dishwasher. "The way you rebuilt your entire life from scratch. The way you turned betrayal into triumph. It's inspiring." "I just did what I had to do," Naomi had said modestly. "No," Joel had turned to face her. "You did more than that. You could have given up. You could have stayed bitter. You could have played the victim. But you didn't. You chose to be strong. You chose to build something beautiful. That takes real courage." Naomi had felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you," she'd whispered. "I needed to hear that." That night, after Joel had left, Naomi had sat on her couch with Pumpkin and had reflected on her journey. From that terrible night in the restaurant to now. From broken and betrayed to successful and happy. From trapped in a lie to free to be herself. She'd pulled out her journal and had written, "2 years ago I thought my life was ending. I thought Brandon's betrayal would destroy me. But it didn't. It freed me. It showed me I was stronger than I ever knew. It gave me the courage to build the life I'd always wanted but had been too scared to pursue. I'm not grateful for what he did. Betrayal is never okay. But I'm grateful for who I became because of it. I'm grateful I found my strength. I'm grateful I chose myself. I'm grateful I didn't settle for less than I deserved. Today I'm happy. Genuinely, deeply happy. I have a successful business, a beautiful home, amazing friends, a family who loves me, a cat who tolerates me, and maybe, just maybe, the beginning of something special with someone who deserves me. But most importantly, I have myself. I have confidence and independence and peace. I have the knowledge that I can survive anything, that I can rebuild from ashes, that I can choose happiness even when life tries to break me. This is my happily ever after. Not the one I planned, not the one I expected, but the one I earned. And it's so much better than anything I could have imagined. She closed her journal and looked around her living room, at the awards on her mantle, at the photos of her with friends and family, at the life she'd built entirely on her own terms. She'd smiled, scratched Pumpkin's ears and whispered, "We did it, buddy. We really did it." Outside, the stars were shining brightly. Inside, Naomi's new life continued to unfold. A life built on authenticity, strength, and choosing herself every single day. A life where the worst day had led to the best years. A life she'd built not in spite of Brandon's betrayal, but because of it. A life that was truly, completely, happily hers. And it was just the beginning.